Hello and welcome back to the WARC Podcast. I'm Hamill, Senior Editor at WARC, and today we are back at the IPA Effectiveness Conference in London, bringing you the latest and greatest effectiveness research that you need to know for 2026. This is part 2 of our series, so be sure to listen to our previous episode for more detail on influencer measurement, the impact of music on marketing effectiveness, and a thoughtful discussion on where AI could take advertising next. For WARC subscribers, our reporting team have been busy. They have covered all of the new research in more detail on WARC.com as well, and you can access that right now. But before we meet our first guest today, here's a message from our sponsors.
Are you searching for pricing data that keeps your brand ahead of the curve? Acuity Pricing's competitor price tracking, promotions, and proposition tools help the UK's biggest brands act with speed, scale, and confidence. Providing real-time, quality data sent straight to where you need it, when you need it. It's why 7 out of the UK's 10 biggest retailers and more than 60 global brands trust Acuity Pricing to get the job done. Check out acuitypricing.com to book a demo and get started.
New analysis of the IPA databank finds that budget is 8 times more important than creative and media ROI when it comes to driving effectiveness. But marketers appear to be misdiagnosing their challenge by optimizing for efficiency rather than for profitability. This new research from Les Binet and Will Davis, who is Chief Data Officer and co-owner at MediaLab, promises to reshape how marketers think about generating profit. And it's a challenge to an industry obsessed with ROI. Marketers need to reset their approach in the planning, budgeting, and measurement phases to generate real profit. Will and Les are here now to discuss this in more depth. Welcome to the WARC Podcast.
Thank you. Thank you.
Will, I want to start with you first. Can you walk us through the fundamentals of the study? How did you bring this together and what you were both looking to build on in terms of what we already know about effectiveness? Where does this study take us?
Yeah, sure. Les and I started working together on the Lathwaite's case study about a year ago, a bit more than that. And I think we've got similar views on how marketing works and doesn't work. We're both really interested in the measurement side of it. So I think Les was really interested with some of the things he's been seeing throughout recent years in his career. And I've just been building a business from the ground up for a very long time, trying to prove impact. And I think now was a good time to go out and understand from CMOs how are they really doing it. And I think we are detecting at the moment that every time I look on LinkedIn, I see another article that suggests there's people thinking similar to what we are, which is what actually drives effectiveness. And so I think what Les has done and his new findings really blow that open.
Yeah, lots of really interesting data in this report. And the research showed that budget, scale, and reach matter more than creative and media effectiveness when striving for net profit. Can you explain that finding to us in a little bit more depth?
Yeah, I mean, a part of the insight that started all this is this thing that as an industry, we're obsessed with efficiency. But efficiency is not the same as effectiveness. This is something I've been saying for years. And I suppose what we've done that's new here is first we've quantified the relative contributions of budget and efficiency to effectiveness, so budget and ROI. So we've quantified that econometrically. And then, as Will said, the other thing is we've then looked at what marketers think, and reality and what marketers think are out of sync with one another. Marketers think that it's primarily about efficiency and how you spend your money and creative and media plans and so forth, and that is all really, really important. And they don't realize just how important budget and reach and scale are. So the talk we did today was really a sort of rallying cry for remembering that what advertising can do above all is to create scale. And then efficiency is important as well. But we really need to think about the bigness of advertising.
Interesting. So the latest figures from the IPA databank, which you based your research on, suggests that ROI has increased by 4% since the COVID pandemic, but net profit generated is down 11%
In real terms, yeah.
in the same time frame. Yeah, that's quite an alarming data point. Was that a surprise to you?
No.
Please explain.
It's kind of what I was thinking we'd find. And that encapsulates the centre of what we're trying to talk about. Is I'm not sure whether this is a point people fully understand and it's obvious or not, but effectiveness and efficiency are not the same thing. I've routinely, for years, encountered people using the two words as if they're the same thing. They're not, they're different, and actually quite often they point in different directions. Sometimes the most efficient things to do are the least effective. The biggest way, the easiest way to improve efficiency in advertising is to cut the budget. That increases efficiency and it reduces effectiveness. And that's a big part of what's been going on, is that we're all trying to do more with less. In fact, what we're actually doing is do less with less.
It's really interesting. That was going to be my next question to both of you, actually. Are these findings a direct result, as you say, of that do more with less kind of culture amid marketing budget constraints that we've seen over the last few years? You know, budgets are shrinking, especially in rough economic times, which just don't feel like they've been letting up recently. What's your view on that, Will? Do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, I very much agree. It's tough times. It has been for a while. I think we keep thinking next year is going to be the year when economic growth comes back. It hasn't happened yet. So I think there's a lot of businesses under real pressure, costs going up across the board. They are being asked to do more with less. It's really difficult to do. And I think the pressure I spoke about today with some of the findings we've got, it's totally understandable because people are looking for a short-term return on investment. I think there's sometimes jobs on the line. You've got to show that you're making an impact, and it's really hard. It's a hard climate to do good work in, and with less budget, there's less you can do. So you do start cutting back, and maybe you're not as bold and not as brave. So I think it's difficult times, but I think the example of Laithwaites was a really good example of actually you can go big on a budget. It's a brave thing to do, but you can test it and you can prove that it works. And that's why we wanted to sort of bring that to life today, because I think sometimes clients are sitting there thinking, I want to go and do some of this, but I don't know where to get started. And I'm a bit scared because I might lose my job. So yeah, I think it's a difficult time, but it's not the time to keep pulling back budgets. If you want big growth, you've got to keep investing.
For the benefit of our international listeners who may be less familiar with that case, can you expand a little bit on who the client was and how you worked with them to implement this type of thinking?
So Laithwaites are a brilliant family-owned wine business. They've been around since the 60s, 70s. They've done really well. They're a direct response business, don't really do brand activity. They had a brilliant lockdown, no surprise to anyone, but when they came out of it, I guess classically, there were less people in market for wine by mail order. So they came up with the idea of, could we complement our activation marketing with broadcast level brand building? And that was the idea. And the brief to us was, can you make it a bulletproof test? Because we've got to make it work. So we did a regional test. A lot of work went into making it a really fair test. And we switched on a brand campaign in those test regions. And lo and behold, we got a really nice incremental uplift in commercial success as well as brand impact. So that's how we did it. And it's a model we really like. One of the things we like about it is, I think, senior buy-in. Sometimes people find a black and white regional test easier to understand than perhaps a statistical analysis, an econometric model. So we think it's a really nice playbook for testing it out for yourself.
Really interesting. Liz, what did you think of that campaign?
Well, I mean, we worked on that together, and one of the things I like about it is it shows how if you focus on what really matters to a client, sales, profit, cash flow actually is really important for the smaller businesses. If you focus on those things, and if you give hard financial evidence of the effects of investing in advertising, then it's much easier to unlock the budgets and the scale that you need. I mean, as you said, Will, these are tough times for lots of businesses. And, it's all very well for me to say, oh, you need to go big and you need to spend big. If you're a business that's cash strapped, that's hard to do. But in the marketing industry, we don't do ourselves a great service by focusing on fluffy things like, clicks and likes and being in culture and all these other things, which are not, we need to talk and think and act like business people. We need to talk about money. We need to talk about cash flow. We need to talk about generating profit. And the Laithwaites case is an example of talking and thinking in those terms and offering hard financial evidence to skeptical business people whose businesses are on the line. I think as an industry, we've kind of colluded with this whole doing more with less rhetoric. Like, yeah, great, let's cut the budgets. Let's do small things. Let's do, lots of little things. Let's be in culture. Let's be smart and go viral and everything. We're slitting our own throats. I think the Laithwaites case, I mean, it's one best small budget IPA paper. It won a gold at the IPA. But actually, it's best small budget, but it's about the transition from a very small budget towards a bigger one. And that's what inspires me about that case.
Really interesting. The title of your presentation was Go Big or Go Home, which is a really big statement to make, right? Can you tell me in practical terms what going big looks like?
Yes.
In the context of this research?
So it's a number of things. First of all, it's recognizing that advertising superpower is the ability to create creativity at scale. It's about budget, it's about reach, it's about exposure, it's about many, many channels and many eyeballs. It's about bigness. And that means that we need to unlock the budgets to create big effects. And it means going big in media. It means, thinking about how many exposures you need and using many channels. It means big creative ideas. It means big campaigns. And I think very specifically within our industry, we need to rediscover what scale means. I think many people, particularly in creative agencies, have lost the sense of what is a big number in advertising. One of my little rules of thumb is 1 million is a rounding error in advertising. If you want to really move the dial for a medium-sized campaign in the UK, you need to be getting of the order. You need not just millions, not just tens of millions, but hundreds of millions of exposures. John Lewis, 5 billion exposures in the UK in 4 years. That's the kind of number that moves the dial. So when I listen to people in creative agencies, I was in a meeting a few years back where we spent half an hour talking about 84 uploads to Instagram. Fuck off. That is trivial. It's unimportant. We need to be talking about millions and tens of millions and billions of exposures. And we need to rediscover our sense of what scale means in advertising. I mean, I've noticed, for example, that during the course of today, I heard the phrase several times, most people here won't have seen this, but that's quite telling in itself, isn't it?
At an advertising conference when everybody works in advertising.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
It's not looking good if you haven't seen it.
I mean, you can probably tell that there's a certain amount of anger here, in my part anyway, because I have seen the way in which, as an industry, we have I think, lost our way. We have moved from being an industry. People talk about being in culture. Somebody talked to me earlier on about, we, as a brand, we want to be in culture. Well, my first question was, what does that mean? But being in culture is things, for example, a Super Bowl ad is right at the centre of culture. Strictly and Bake Off and Love Island are at the centre of culture. Big things that everybody talks about. John Lewis Christmas ads, I would argue, right at the centre of culture. But when people start to say, well, we're in culture, you won't have seen this, but you're not in culture.
Really interesting. I know that a lot of our listeners will be listening to this and they'll be going, well, I wish I had millions of dollars to spend on a single campaign. Are there any kind of parts of this research that also apply if you have a smaller budget? Is it about choosing more effective media? Is it about being smart with your money rather than size of the budget? I mean, can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, the Laithwaites example is a small budget campaign, wasn't it? So how much was it?
I think the first burst was probably about £500,000. Now we won we won 2 golds at the IPA. One of them was the small budget category, and it's a bit of a joke for the client because it's a lot of money for them. It's significant, but it's a lot less than running a fully national campaign. The key thing for Laithwaites is a small regional test gave them the confidence to run a larger one, and that gave them the confidence to go national. So we built our way up to it, but we're under no illusions that it's a significant amount of money. But I think when businesses really want to grow, and a lot of businesses do want to grow at the moment, you've got to be really honest about what are your levers. If you want to do it with marketing, you are going to have to invest. So it's about building the case, and I think regional is a great stepping stone to going national.
Yeah. I mean, everybody wants to, have massive results with, minimal spend, in the same way that, everybody wants to turn lead into gold and all that sort of stuff.
I mean, that's the dream, isn't it?
It's literally a dream, as in it's a fantasy, and it's however, I would say, and I wasn't able to say this earlier on, being big is about being big relative to your size. Well, something, very dear to my heart. Tom Roach and I were at the Festival of Marketing last week, and actually we both came to the same thing in slightly different ways. Tom said it's about kind of punching above your weight, looking bigger than you are. So what is big for a small brand is different for what's big for a big brand. So if you are a small brand, going big may be about, like Tom says, it's about punching above your weight. And mathematically, it's about, having your share of voice above your market share. But at the root of this, and, clever media thinking and creativity can multiply the efficiency of what you do. But at the root of this, there are some hard media numbers. It's about getting eyeballs and so forth, and understanding in your market, in your category, for a brand of your size, what is a decent number?
So my last question for you both, what are the key takeaways you want people to take away from this research? How can marketers change their mindset and their approach to think beyond that creative and media effectiveness ROI toward what's going to generate profit? Cold, hard cash.
Really my message today was that Laithwaites was a tale of bravery and of balance. It's not about offline or online only. It's about using them together, and activation and brand. And it's also a story of measurement, because we proved it. And my kind of provocation to the room at the end of the session was, go out and test it for yourself. And there's so much changing in media at the moment. It's not just about TV or out of home or digital, but experiments. Our survey told us that only 30% of CMOs run experiments. So what an amazing opportunity to go out and try it for yourself. And I think we should be doing more of that. That
line, bravery, balance and measurement, I picked up on this earlier on stage, is the measurement bit is the bit that you're not expecting. It's kind of like you hear people in our world talking about, we need to be brave, we need to be creative. They don't usually sort of put measurement in there with those other things. My sort of related point is I want people to start thinking, creativity and bravery and all those other things, but also, if you like, the economics, the hard sort of financial business thinking about what we do. I mean, I don't think it gets talked about nearly enough, particularly budget setting. I was sort of trying to make the argument that the single most important marketing decision is how much to spend. And it's the one that gets the least attention. So let's not just think about how to allocate budgets, but let's think about how big budgets should be. And then there's a whole load of stuff there about the allocation of spend between media and fixed costs. Let's think like creative people, but let's also think like economists.
That's a great place to leave it. Where can we find out more about this research? Is there anywhere we can download it? Or it's already on WARC.com, by the way, but is there anything else?
There will be something further down the line, but not yet.
Watch this space. Thanks, Les. Thanks, Will, for being here.
Thank you so much.
Lions Learning doesn't just teach, it transforms. Like the Master of Advertising Effectiveness led by James Herman, which gives you the evidence-based principles to create campaigns that deliver commercial results. This 6-week online program equips you with a complete understanding of effectiveness principles that make your work more consistent and successful. The October cohort is filling fast. Ready to go? Visit learning.lions.co today.
If you're in marketing and advertising, you know just how hard it can be to communicate the impact of marketing to a C-suite filled with non-marketers. And in these tough times, with budgets on the line, it's never been more important to make a strong case for continued investment in growing a brand long-term. But that's often easier said than done. Alastair Macrow was previously global CMO at McDonald's, and in 2021 he became the CEO of McDonald's in the UK and Ireland, a job he finished up just a couple of weeks ago. So who better to share tips on how to turn marketing effectiveness into boardroom impact than from someone who's been on both sides of that discussion? Alastair joins us now, fresh from the IPA Effectiveness Conference stage. Welcome to the WARC Podcast.
Hi.
When you moved from CMO to CEO, what were the biggest changes in your mindset regarding growing the business? I guess you have to take more of a generalist perspective.
Look, it's a really interesting question because, to be honest, I think I spent a lot of time thinking about business growth as a CMO. Right? It feels like it's your biggest responsibility. So I didn't necessarily go in with a particularly different perspective. I guess what I suddenly learned about in a business like ours is how many enablers there are to growth to really make it happen. How important the supply chain is to meeting your aspirations. And something's quite difficult when you decide to launch a breakfast wrap and it sells a lot more than you thought. You suddenly need extra 500,000 eggs. Well, the hens didn't know that, and getting 500,000 fresh eggs for the next day is quite tough. So the perspectives get broader. Thinking about the restaurant operation as a marketeer, if they said, look, we can't really deal with the volume, I'd think about, well, that's your problem to deal with. My job's to give you as much volume. As CEO, you suddenly need to balance that in a very different way and make sure that you put the right things in place to enable the restaurants to be able to deal with that volume, to make sure the customers get the right experience. So it doesn't in any way quell the ambition, but it does mean that you spend a bit more time thinking about how is it actually going to happen rather than it's just going to happen.
And now you're an expert on the egg-laying habits of the nation's hens.
I certainly know a lot more about them, indeed.
Did you think that would happen at the start of your career?
It wasn't something that sat on I think this is going to be a problem for me to solve list at all. And I think that's probably the thing to learn about being a CEO as well, is the days are even less predictable than you imagine they are. I think the more senior you get in your career, or certainly the more senior I've got in my career, I've always thought that's the point I'm going to get more control of my time, because clearly I'm the bigger boss. There's fewer people telling me what to do. And I've found with every time I've got promoted, I have less discretionary time because there are more things that are absolutely are pushed in your direction. And actually your single biggest job is making sure that you allocate your time in the most effective way possible, because it's actually all you've got to give.
So, and I guess as well, when you were focused previously on marketing as global CMO at McDonald's, but marketing really touches every part of the business these days. Did you find that your marketing skill set was actually very helpful?
Yes, indeed. I think that there's a number of things about being a good CMO that come in useful as you go into broader roles. First of all, to be a good CMO, you've got to understand all the drivers of the business and all the enablers that sit behind us. We were just talking about. The other things is marketing teams are big teams, and actually, what's really interesting I find about them is the amount of creative people that are within there, and what it takes to inspire and get the best out of people with that type of mindset. That becomes incredibly useful when you put it across the entire business, thinking about how do you get the best out of every individual team across the business. So, yeah, I think that those skill sets are incredibly useful. I think the other thing that's happening is more and more marketeers are becoming accountable for results. They're holding themselves to account. And part of that, I think, is simply driven by the apparent extra accountability that comes through the digital marketing, through the continued growth of direct channels. And so marketeers are more versed in commercial conversations than they possibly were 25 years ago. That's incredibly helpful for any future career.
One of the things you mentioned in your talk was how important the language of effectiveness is in terms of both persuading the C-suite as a marketer, but also in really understanding that going from a CMO to CEO role. This has been a really hot topic in effectiveness research over the last couple of years, something we've talked a lot about at WARC as well. What has your experience been in the importance of the language of effectiveness?
Yeah, I think it's critical. For me, just as a CMO and actually as a marketing director before that, it was critical for gaining credibility, being able to have a conversation with people in their language. Of course, the tools of return on marketing spend and being able to talk pound for pound is important, but actually a lot broader than that. Being able to talk about what the objectives of a campaign are and what people should expect, being able to be brave enough to say that we are going to increase awareness by this amount. We are going to influence people to change the way they think, and that way we're going to elicit this level of behavior, and we're going to give this return on the money we spend, money we invest, and actually changing that conversation from spend to invest. That, I think, is really important for credibility, and it allows you to have conversation with more people. A CFO and a CEO understand the conversation, which is essentially about, I'm going to deploy these resources in this way to achieve these results. That's the language of the boardroom in almost every area. So immediately it gives you credibility and allows people to think about marketing in a slightly different way. Certainly makes that shift from spend to investment and helps put the thought in people's mind, should we be spending more? When for so long people thought, is marketing an opportunity to save money? They start thinking about, is an opportunity to spend money to drive more returns? And that was particularly critical at that stage. And I think it certainly then helped me move towards CEO. And the other piece going towards CEO was then also understanding what the extra capabilities were. And for me, the big step on my journey came on a course in 2018, hearing from a lady called Liz Wiseman, who'd written several very good books. And she asked me, do I want to be a genius or genius maker? And it really stopped me in my tracks, because I would have quite liked to have been a genius. And I suddenly realized what a waste of time that would be as a leader in a big business. And to be an effective CEO, you are so much more effective if you can go about creating geniuses all around you. The questions you ask are far more important than the answers that you give. So having taken that effectiveness piece to give credibility in the marketing space at the board level, and adding to it the capability that came from answering that question, I then felt prepared in a different way to become a CEO. One of the fantastic things about working for a business like McDonald's is ultimately you're held to account by a network of franchisees who are all invested in a 20-year term in the business. So they are really interested in driving the long term of the business because that's where their brand is. But they are also very interested in driving the short term of the business because that's what's paying their way day in, day out. So that really helps to keep that tension in a really healthy place, because there isn't one stakeholder that's got too much strength in one area or the other. As a marketeer, it just leaves you with a difficult decision of how do I balance this and what recommendations do I put together. But I think we've got enough measures to be able to get that pretty much right. And it's not an exact science, but I think you can get pretty close to it. The thing that always muddies it, of course, is if you've got an exceptional campaign or you've got a poor campaign, because then you get into the campaign performance as opposed to the mix of long and short term that starts to define whether people think it's successful or not. That, for me, is why a big part of effectiveness, particularly in the boardroom level, is being really clear about what the objectives are. It's not enough just to come in afterwards and say, I'm holding myself to account, here's your return on investment. It's much better to be brave up front, to be clear about what you're trying to achieve so you can measure it. And what I think that allows you to do is to develop the last and most one of the most important aspects for maximizing effectiveness, and that's consistency. So often you see people or brands moving on from a strategy or moving on from a creative direction far too soon because they've got bored with it before the customers have. And actually, as Les touched on this morning, more often than not, campaigns get more effective as time goes on. But to get that time, people have to understand how it's supposed to work. So if there's any blip from that performance, you can explain it and retain that commitment to the longer term. If you've not done that piece up front, then all people can judge you on is yesterday's sales. And if they judge you on that, you're basically at the mercy of whether or not that particular campaign was good enough.
Yeah, it's a really good point. You mentioned franchises. I want to ask you about the dynamic of the marketing function within a huge franchise business like McDonald's. Successful franchises, customer experience, localized marketing, they're all really essential to a business like McDonald's globally. As CMO, but also as CEO of a local market, how do you go about implementing that global standard of experience and distinctive assets, those types of things, across the whole business, while also allowing local markets or franchises to adapt?
That's a specialist subject. I could talk to you about this all day. But being a franchise business is what makes McDonald's as strong as it is. It absolutely strengthens the brand. And at the heart of that is the fact that you've got experienced local business people invested, not just financially, but emotionally into the business and into the restaurants. So
and into its longevity.
Absolutely, for a 20-year term, so that they need the short and the long term. So you've got the right commitment to it. You bring that together with McDonald's, this incredible global brand, just known by everybody around the world, world famous food, a world famous way of serving people. Those franchisees buy into that brand, they buy into the marketing, they buy into the operation, they buy into the efficiencies, and of course they buy into the food. But what they're able to bring is a local connectivity that a global brand alone can't get. It's what makes McDonald's the most local global brand, or maybe it makes it the most global local brand, I don't know which. But the reality is those franchisees understand their communities they serve. They understand the people who work in the restaurants, they understand the customers that visit them, and they look after them because in their interest to do so. They invest in those local communities, whether that's the miles and miles that are walked in litter picks every single day to keep the area looking right, whether it's supporting local football teams, whether it's the work that goes into champion youth and youth workers in the community. Time and time again, you see franchisees making the business stronger at a local level. So that's a real critical part of being a global brand being a local brand on a global scale. Now, of course, the elephant in the room is, well, how can you possibly have one face of a global brand when it's owned by so many people around the world? And of course, there's a rule book and all those sort of things, but that's not where it comes from. If you are working in a business like McDonald's that's franchise, what it teaches you is the need to think about influence rather than relying on authority. And franchisees tend to be passionate people, passionate about the brand, passionate about their business. So if you can really enthuse them about what you want to do, why the direction you're going to take the brand is good for them and good for their customers, why they're going to enjoy the returns you expect, then they come on the journey with you. And you don't have to police it. It happens because people want to. It's all about making people feel that they want to be part of that journey. And that's the heart of the model. It's really strong influence. Yes, it's backed up by what you must and mustn't do. And of course, you have to have those in place. But actually, real success comes from the way people feel and want to do rather than have to do things. The other really important aspect when you think about effectiveness and marketeers in particular is I believe the franchise model has made me a better marketeer and makes all of my marketeers better. And that's simply because it's the franchisee's money you invest. They pay a proportion of their sales into an advertising fund that ultimately they control. The marketing team, of course, recommend how we invest it, but every penny has to be signed off by a group of franchisees representing the entire group. Now, those people, as we talked about, they have interest in the short term, they have interest in long term. They want to know that they're going to get a return on their investment. So they're not going to sign off a campaign unless they know what you're forecasting it's going to do to their business and how it's going to change things. And then they expect you to come back and demonstrate whether it's worked or not. That creates a different level of accountability that I've not experienced in any other business. And actually, it creates a level of trust with those franchisees, which really, really helps the business.
Well, we could talk all day, really. I've got so many more questions. Unfortunately, we are out of time. Really excited to see what you do next. I'm sure a lot of people will be in touch with you after your session, wanting to get some of your expertise. So thank you so much, Alastair, for joining us here on the WARC Podcast.
Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure.
It's a busy time in the world of effectiveness. Our final guests today are WARC's own David Tiltman and the IPA's Director of Effectiveness, Laurence. They're going to share some of the big picture trends shaping effectiveness with us as we finish up our coverage of the annual IPA Effectiveness Conference. So, David, I'll start with you. You've been in a lot of sessions today. I know you've been scribbling on your notepad. Was there anything that really stuck out to you?
I think one thing I'll sort of start with, and I know we've covered this on the sessions we've been doing, but really interesting to see a through line from some of the sessions we had in Cannes coming into this conference, and in particular, this sort of tension. I don't think it's an unresolvable tension, but it is a tension between the message about size and scale and going large with the sorts of lots of little kind of framework. Now, lots of little doesn't mean going small, but it's talking about basically their starting points are quite different. One is building from the ground up with lots of small things, and the other one is you go as big as possible, you find the biggest possible opportunity and then keep building around that. Now, as I say, I don't think that's an unresolvable tension, but it is interesting how we're sort of really seeing effectiveness theory run into the practice of modern marketing. And I think the sort of like the next frontier really is working out what all this means and talking about the how of effectiveness as well as the why.
In classic form, you've stolen my next question, which I was just about to ask you, Laurence, actually. So maybe you can build on what David said, but it's challenging times right now for a lot of brands, and budgets are squeezed, and it feels like no one knows what the next week is going to bring. How does effectiveness thinking move out of the conference room and become even more influential within companies to grow brands and build profits in what feels like a really challenging time?
So I think the first piece is communication. So there was lots of R&D today. It needs to find its audience, and its audience isn't just the people who geek out today, wonderful as they are. It needs to live in their companies and amongst their shareholders, even at an extreme. It's why we talk a lot and talked a lot today about culture, that actually a company that leans into brand building and leads into the marketing science will win over the long term. And I think that's probably the bit we don't talk about enough, that when horizons are long, or when you see the data that reports on 2 years of payback rather than 3 months, you begin to develop a very different picture of what success looks like. And I think my version of the tension that David reports between lots of little and go big or go home is actually that we've had a traditional sort of understanding that excess share of voice and big budgets and brand incumbency would win. We kind of forgot about that over the last sort of 5 or 10 years as we built new platforms with new rules, typically with shorter term horizons. And I feel like the two are coming together. So they're not perfectly aligned yet, but I feel like those two sort of streams of understanding are coming together. And once they are together, rather than presenting them as kind of choices or conflicts, I think you'll begin to understand, okay, if I want to build a brand and build a price premium and enjoy all the economies of scale of being bigger, I need to commit to some old school truths like spend like you mean it, commit. And I need to make sure that all the little things I can now do scale up as well. So I think in the end, it will be both. I feel like this was a staging post on that journey.
Yeah. And I think it's really interesting. So that the day ended with some sort of actual brand side speakers, and we had the Heinz, the lady from Heinz, giving their story. Now I'm sure people who listen to the WARC podcast are very familiar with the Heinz story. We've featured it on the podcast before. But what's really interesting there is she was talking a lot about the different ads they've done, but also about their sort of internal sort of creator they've already got their own agency in house that does a lot of their creator social work, and they're able to stitch it all together because they've done the work and they've got this sort of framing of irrational love, which is expressed as it has to be Heinz. But because they have that can feed into everything they do. So it doesn't matter whether it's a sort of quick response to Taylor Swift's new album dropping or a giant bus, covered in beans, pictures of beans, not actual beans. There'll be a lot of beans. But it all adds up. And I think there's a sort of really interesting reminder that actually some of the strategic basics are more important now than ever. And actually, if we are moving to a lots of little world, the only way you make lots of little add up to something big is by having those basics in place.
I want to ask you, Laurence, and we'll start with you and then David, a question for you. What do you feel most optimistic about in our industry over the next 12 months?
I like the continued spirit of inquiry that we have. That's alive and well in the UK. It's alive and well for you guys in Cannes. The optimistic part of me is that we're in the right market to lead best practice. I think we're coming back to some fundamentals. So one of the Heinz slides, I think, said the trick is to be timeless and timely. And David and I were saying earlier that there's some timeless truths that we will continue to repeat, but then there's some timely stuff, especially around execution, that's really important for us to get our heads around. And I actually mean that as the IPA as well. We've tended to overrepresent big agencies with big budgets, with departments that inspect effectiveness. And I think what you guys and we guys hopefully do is create an understanding that it's for everybody in an organization, that it's an operating system, not the bit at the end of the process. I think that's part of the maturing of effectiveness and why we've had more people, I think, at this conference than ever before, that people are leaning into it and going, I get it. If I put good thinking at the front end, I get better stuff out at the back end. Whereas I think probably the first era of effectiveness was better inspection at the back end. And to David's point, better demonstrations that it works rather than an understanding of how it works.
David, what's your view based on what you've heard today? What are you optimistic about?
I think I'm optimistic in that we're asking the right questions. So one of the big headlines from this conference is the new data we have around creator effectiveness or influencer effectiveness, I think was the phrasing they used in the session. And I think it's really important that the bodies like the IPA are doing this sort of research, because these are actually fundamental questions. And I think, the temptation would be to sort of sit on our hands and wait to see if creators and influencers are like, just the latest fad that blows over. When I think this is where modern media is going. There's
$30 billion plus going into creator and influencer. It feels like more than a fad to me.
It's definitely more than a fad. But we have to be able to understand this. Now, look, we are not at the end of this process. There's a really interesting breakout session which pointed out that we are lacking just basic audience measurement data in a lot of these newer channels. And that includes creator, but it's social more broadly. And that creates a sort of fogginess around how to plan in these channels. And I think it's only by sort of asking these questions and trying to bring these sort of new and emerging techniques and give them some of the rigor that we've had for more traditional techniques, that we're going to get to a place where we're actually able to more confidently say, if you spend this is the sort of impact you're going to have. I mean, as we've already said on these podcasts, creator and social have some of the biggest variance in effectiveness. It can be amazing or it can be nothing. It is, one of the speakers uses the term death or glory. Now, it's not a sort of something that you can easily put into a scenario plan. It either delivers everything or it delivers nothing. But, we're actually asking the right questions. And I think we're in a space now where we're starting to get some answers. And it's quite exciting to see that take shape.
Well, I will not hold you back from a drink any longer. Thank you both for joining us on the WARC Podcast.
Thanks, Anna.
Thanks, Anna.
If you like what you've heard today, be sure to follow for more insights from the WARC Podcast as we count down to the end of the year. Have a great day.